Our next speakers are friends of mine, and they're on the organizing committee, and they shared the pain, especially at the beginning as we were finding speakers, and they have a blog called A Couple of Atheists, and in addition to the blog, another important thing that they do in Pittsburgh for atheism is have karaoke parties. So when I first became involved with atheism, it was through karaoke. So it's the Couple of Atheists.
All right, well, as she said, we're a couple of atheists. My name is Allison. This is Hess. We're here to talk to you today about how to raise a family with secular values in a religiously dominated world. Right about a month after I met Rich, my grandmother died, and it was a very sad time for our family. At her funeral, near the end, after flubbing the fact that my grandmother had died, not my grandfather, a few times, the priest, he said, "And the Reed family welcomes you to join them at the cemetery. You're also welcome to check out our website at www.stjameswilkinsburg.org. I found this odd and a little uncomfortable, but I left the funeral. A couple weeks later, after the mourning period was over, I found out that it wasn't the flubs in my grandparents' genders that upset anyone. It wasn't the plugging of the website. It happened to be the fact that an atheist took part in a funeral. That I stood up, I sat down, I knelt, I sang on Eagle's Wings, and that I was even there at all. So that's just one example of how being an atheist in a religious family can be quite difficult. It makes you want to say, can't you just stop shoving my atheism down your own throat? This is not about you. This was a moment about Grandma, and we need to leave it at that. Now, as being a parent doesn't get you enough unsolicited advice, being an atheist parent is even worse. You'd think we were raising our kids to be Nazis, white supremacists. We've been told things like, how dare you teach them not to believe in God? Or, how can you dare raise them to be atheists? We're not tolerating our children being told that they're going to go to hell, that they'll burn forever just for being who they need to be, or that they need to be saved, that they're evil just for being born as humans, or that they're lost without God. What we do, however, is still in them humanistic outlooks grounded in secular values. We want them to have a high respect for themselves and for others, and take moral ownership. People have this stereotype that atheist children live in angry, mean homes with cold-hearted parents, and it's just completely miserable. But that's not so. People in the believer community, they act as if we're taking something fundamental out of the lives of our children, and depriving them of something so profound. I was raised by a moderate Catholic mother and an atheist father who's sitting right there. And I had to go to catechism each Saturday as a child, and I simply just saw it as another school, one I didn't particularly like because I missed all my Saturday activities. And, well, at the age of 12, my father gave me a copy of Bertrand Russell's Why I'm Not a Christian. I was hooked on that and quickly moved on to some T. Gilbert, and it escalated from there. Just as with my upbringing in atheism not being a big deal as far as the immediate home goes, we are doing the same with our kids. They're lucky enough to have a father who's an atheist, but their birth mother, she is a moderate Catholic. They have to face every day questions of what they're going to do when they go to hell. Why would they want to believe in God? Why would they put their family through such pain? it's hard for them to understand that you're not teaching anyone to be an atheist, but more teaching them rational thought. We want them to not accept things on faith, because when you do that, when you finally stop thinking that something just could be, atheism will follow as the result. If you remove God as a possible answer to your situation, things become much clearer. Coming out as an atheist is always a hot topic around our community. We heard Amanda Brown speak about it, and Lori Gaylor. You can do it online, you can do it in person. But really, if it's that hard for you to come out and say you're an atheist, can you imagine what it's like for your child? What Rich and I try to do is prepare our children for the type of questions they're going to get. As I said, they've been bombarded with God since the day they were born. They're now 19 and 15. But it wasn't always so easy to just say they're atheists. They had to pretend as they were growing up that they did believe in God, until Rich finally stepped up for them and changed that situation. Though his mother still cries often, wondering what she'll do about him when he's in hell with me. I find that knowledge and confidence are the keys to preparing your child for the negativity that they're inevitably going to receive when they become people that are atheists. There's a vast difference between teaching and preaching religion. If you show your children what each religion stands for and where the basic flaws lie, they can begin to formulate their own point of view. However, sending them into the world blindly is sure to set them up for an ambush, mainly from adults, and more ostracizing them from their peers. The older they get, the higher the stakes will be, and eventually they may be faced with a battle involving issues such as separation of church and state. And that's where it becomes tricky. I often consider what battles I would want to fight in the name of the rights of my own children. And I find them on 3 levels. We just had a baby, so even though the boys are done with a lot of this, she's just starting out 1 month old. So we've got to prepare her well. I find 3 levels of the battles I would fight. 1 level is mandatory battles. This would be something like the 10 Commandments hanging in her school. It would be completely inappropriate. We have a woman right here in Pittsburgh now fighting that for her kids, and I would stand right next to her if Arabella was there. Another would be if the teacher or coach tried to implement mandatory prayer for a game or class. I would have to step in. The second level for me is something that would be up to her. This falls under the umbrella for me of things like if she wants to participate in the Pledge of Allegiance. I'm not going to make her ostracize herself from her peers. I liked to do that. I used to sit down and refuse to say under God, but that's not something I would make happen. Surprising to some of my atheist friends, and don't hate, but I think there are battles that we don't want to pick. A few years back, there was a car accident in Pittsburgh that killed a 7-year-old girl. She was in the 2nd grade class in a public school, and since it was around Christmas, they put up a Christmas tree where you could hang angels in her memory. Now this was a time of great pain for that family, and it brought comfort to the kids to see these 2 Christian symbols and feel like they were making something for her memory. So would you want to go in while others are mourning and step on the toes of that? What would be gained by just saying, you don't have the right to mourn this child in the way that you and the family feels fit? Nothing. Nothing would happen. All it would do is provide more negativity to an already painful situation. With our boys, we've taught them tolerance is important in many situations, but not every situation. We hope that the critical thinking that we've instilled is going to help them decide what 3 levels they will use when they have children. These examples, of course, are primarily based on my own experience, and what works in our secular family may not work for all, but the fundamentals are there. So I think I'm going to pass it on to Rich, and you can get a much more technical and probably much more angry view on what raising a secular humanist child is like.
Well, thank you. As Allison pointed out, we don't need to tell our children what to believe. We find it best to teach them critical thinking and reasoning and come up with their own well-informed ideas of their own. We try to steer them in the right direction and the best we can. Is that better? Now that does not mean, now respecting someone's belief, respecting the person is far more important, but that does not mean you have to respect their belief. There is this notion that we're all aware of that beliefs are not to be criticized and even considered an insult in most cases. And as we all know, this is especially true of religion. Beliefs are not sacrosanct, and they need to be questioned. And the issue I want to address here is this: beliefs are not benign. They can have a very profound effect on our view of the world and affect those around us, and have impact on society in various ways. We see this in public policy, the way our politicians pander for things like prayer, especially on the religious right. And questioning and challenging beliefs that shape our world is essential for us to flourish. And I argue that nothing is more important to continue this progress than how we teach our children about the world, not what to teach them about the world. As W.K. Clifford argues in The Ethics of Belief, it is wrong always, everywhere, and for anyone to believe anything on insufficient evidence. Now, even if you don't fully agree with this hard rationalistic approach, we can clearly see how believing in things without evidence can make us more and more credulous, and we would ultimately pass this tradition of credulity on to our children. And with that comes other psychological consequences. It's not enough to say we shouldn't believe irrational things. No one thinks that they do. We don't make a habit of believing things we don't think is true. And this is why we need to peel back the layers of our beliefs, even if they appear to be good, and take a look at what is at the core and why we hold them. Right away, we'll see that religious beliefs go quite a bit deeper than just believing something like ghosts exist. Religion creates a worldview that dominates practically every aspect in the believer's life. It's not even simply a matter of holding a belief that God exists, per se. It's more about what we are told and what we tell others about this God. There are a lot of other ideological commitments and dogmas that accompany whichever particular religion you choose or have foisted onto us at a young age, many of which can be very harmful. Well, what is it about religious beliefs that carries such a potentiality for harm? I'm going to pick on Christianity here today. If we look at how it's taught to children, because I was raised in Sunday school in CCU, my parents were quite religious, kind of scary religious. Now we see that in things like the children's Bible and selected stories made into coloring books. We find it at adults all the time. In fact, we buy a few just for entertainment value in research. They conveniently gloss over the horrible parts. Moses always appears happy. There are pictures of Lazarus springing from his grave with a smile on his face. These animals fit on the ark comfortably somehow, and they're also smiling. And honestly, I always found it, a lot of them have two male lions, which kind of contradicts some of the other scriptures. But they're never really addressing issues like Moses ordering the slaughter of thousands of people by God's command, or that the story of Noah's Ark is just scientifically impossible. The evidence just does not support this. We find that the Bible is full of scientific and historical inaccuracies in many passages that we would consider shockingly immoral by today's standards. By the time the children are confronted with these things, they're already groomed to accept God's will is just, and such a sinful world is deserving of such punishment, and nothing is impossible for God. Naturally, children seek their parents' approval, and they think they're doing good by reciting these passages and singing hymns, all containing the message that God is good, God is great, and God is to be worshipped. They're literally taught to be sheep. Long before they're making their own excuses for their religion, much in the same manner the adults that influenced and nurtured their belief has. It is a result of indoctrination and a cycle that's designed to keep growing generation after generation. This is what our children are being exposed to if we don't talk to them first. Believing this particular God exists is also to believe that this God demands worship. It tells us how to live, how we should treat others. The Word of God is absolute and without question. God is good simply because of his virtue of being God. And we are unworthy to question this. This is a huge problem. Children can't possibly wrap their heads around what's wrong with this, and become adults that can't seem to either. As for the most troubling, as troubling as most of us would find the doctrine of original sin, imagine what this does to the mind of a child. What can be gained by teaching a child that their sole value is found in God, and nothing earthly can provide that kind of meaning? They teach dignity and pride are sins, and there is no meaning to this life without God. That this world is merely a prelude to a greater afterlife and a paradise for those that worship this God, and an eternal torment for disobedience and non-believers. You know, my mother now has a fear, as Allison alluded to, that she's going to go to heaven and I'm not going to be there, and my ex-abusive stepfather will be right alongside her, because he was a devout believer. Now, of course, if you ask a Catholic, he's not going to heaven either. We think of anything more detrimental or destructive to our children's development or to their self-esteem. What about the way girls are groomed at a young age to be subservient to men? It is written right there in the books. The unhealthy views on sex and sexual identity that leads to many misconceptions and anxiety are printed right there for our children to read, even if they're not addressed directly. And it even leads to self-loathing. This is a result of religious indoctrination clashing with reality, when faith cannot be reconciled with reason. And there comes a time when faith can take over reason and supplant reason, and this is when we run into some serious problems. It's teaching like this that lead us to images of children in tears praying for forgiveness of sins they aren't even aware they're guilty of. Pictures of a child holding the Quran in one hand and an AK-47 in the other. Children in Israel cheering at the bombing of Palestinian citizens. These teachings are the very foundations of fundamentalism, and these images serve as proof of how this indoctrinated irrationality manifests itself in most extreme ways. Yet religion is never to be blamed. Terms like extremism and fundamentalism are used to distance these acts from religion. But these are the history of these beliefs. These are what these books say and what they can lead to. It's all a faith supplanting reason. This is the faith that's found in books given to children. Now, moderates, of course, will object to this argument, saying we're just picking the most extreme examples. But why not choose these examples? These people learn from the same book as these ones they're accusing of extremism. Any differences will no doubt be rooted in the values we see in humanism and reason, is why they don't resort to these extreme measures and why there is moderation to begin with. To deny the connection with religious dogma or any form of dogma is to ignore the problem. Our beliefs must be critically analyzed and open for reform should new information come to light, something religion seems very reluctant to do. But we must be honest that many supposed moderates claim to far more moderation than they actually are. We see this as a percentage of people who deny evolution and want creationism taught in schools. They're teaching absurdities right out of the book as if they're true. People raising from the graves, people walking on water, flying unaided. And they're just simply not interested in facts or fallen evidence. And there's an overwhelming number of Christians who oppose same-sex marriage based solely on what the Bible tells them about God's grand plan for marriage. There's real political pressure over these issues. These beliefs are not benign. They are forms of fundamentalism. No matter what apologetic spin these moderates put on it, defending their faith becomes more important than human well-being, such as in the case of hobby lobbying. Their religious freedom becomes an oppression to others' basic human rights. These faith-based beliefs are found in the Bible and just show that these beliefs are not benign. You can find them, you can open up any page of the Bible and find anything that, if taken the wrong way, will lead to extremism. So, to adopt secular values is to know that it's our responsibility to make this a better world. That if we wish to strengthen our moral character and improve the human condition, we must first disregard the absolutism promulgated by religion. If moderates are to be part of this conversation, their dogmatic beliefs and the supernatural authority must be left out. They must be checked at the door. There's no room for that in any human development. First thing, this world is flawed just from the teachings, and it's going to end. In fact, many people are looking forward to that. First thing is whether God exists or not is pretty much irrelevant in this conversation. We've gotten along fine without him already, many of us. Secondly, the problem is really the disgusting idea of servitude and worship. I hold the classic, even if he existed, I wouldn't worship him. To denigrate our dignity in this manner is the most harmful thing we can pass on to our children. The way I see it, the question is not whether we can be good without God. It should be turned on them. We've been doing this for a long time, being good without God. The question should be, can we be good with God? They should be the one to answer why their belief system is superior when it's not grounded in anything that we consider to be morally of value to humans. I think history shows quite clearly that without the values found in secular humanism and reason, the old quote that Voltaire uses, we all know this one, if you can make someone believe absurdities, you can make them commit atrocities, seems true. Thank you.
And Rich, we have time for questions.
Can you recommend any books to read to grandchildren who are being raised Catholic that might at least expose them to some more skeptical thinking without alienating their parents?
There's an author named Courtney Lynn.
How do you spell the last name?
Lynn. And she is the author of It's Okay to Be a Godless Me. I'm a Little Thinker. And there's a couple other ones. Those are the two main ones that I remember. I think Please Don't Bully Me is another one as well.
Dan Brown has maybe yes, maybe no.
Dan Barker.
Dan Barker, sorry, Dan Barker.
Okay, and there's another one from, I think it was Paris. There's another one. I honestly
Wait, we're getting that information back here. Could you repeat that information?
no, I'm sorry. There was a book by Dan Barker that's also good. It's geared more toward children. And there was one, I honestly I forget her first name, but it was from a lady last name Harris that addresses a lot of this too.
Has it been an issue, or do you have suggestions of how to deal with the stealth approach of megachurches to bring young people in based on wanting to be with their friends, basketball games, movie nights, that sort of thing?
Well, that's why we think that the movement needs to start producing things as other people have addressed. We need to start filling that void. Because there was an author that I guess Richard Halloway, he was the former bishop of Edinburgh, and he lost his faith. And he actually wrote books like Godless Morality. He saw the treatment of gay people by the church, and they were also secretly doing this, kind of very hypocritical. And he lost his faith due to how could a loving God persecute people this way. And he still likes the church. He goes to the church, participates in the songs and everything, even though he doesn't believe in it, because of the community feel. And I think that's a very important thing to people to keep trying to do. And there's not enough programs for children yet, but I think expanding that's something people should definitely start looking into. In fact, we might consider looking into stuff like that there. Then when Arabella starts becoming of age, we're going to get involved.
And you had asked if it's become an issue in our own family. And as far as that's concerned, we do not dictate what the kids want to do as far as religion goes. I mean, if they want to explore their options, that's fine. One of Rich's nephews is exactly the same age as his son, his middle son, and one time his nephew asked me if we all hate him because he's not an atheist. And I thought, that's absurd. Of course not. That's fine. So when he chooses to invite our son out to an activity, a church fair, that's completely harmless. Now, I mean, a Pentecostal, worship celebration, overnight walk down might be a little too much for me. I might have to step in there, but yeah, there's a lot. Like I said, teaching about religion is not the same as them preach to. I survived it. I'm sure he applied the critical thinking skills to the point that he can handle it himself.
Yeah, we don't want to run handling snakes either.
As you know, I raised two girls who both, one of them is here, who both would consider themselves atheists. I did not teach them to be atheists. I think what you said is the most important thing, is teach them to think. You know, if they can think, then they're not susceptible to craziness. And it doesn't matter what they expose themselves to, because if they can think their way through it. The most important thing is for them to be able to think, and then they'll come to the realization of what is true and what isn't true. I don't think you have to teach them much more than that, just to think.
Absolutely. As I said, I had an atheist father and a Catholic mother. And at one point in her career, I call her a moderate because she's not really practicing now, but she was carrying the Bible, you know, down the aisle of the church and reading at the lectern. And I would go with her, but it didn't mean anything to me. I mean, I learned about it, but my father's critical thinking skills had me questioning things from the beginning. I remember when I had to make my first Holy Communion, which we were told we were doing for the sake of my grandparents. You have to make your first confession before you make your first communion. And since I didn't believe in it, and I wanted to test the theory that, you know, you can't lie to the priest, I decided to go in and lie to him. I made up a bunch of stuff that I didn't do, and nothing happened to me. So, and I also did not say my 10 Hail Marys.
Yes, and I think it's funny how you're teaching critical thinking skills. Most people will end up sitting in an audience like this.
Anyone else have any questions? I wanted to point out that Courtney Lynn, the author that Allison mentioned, is based in Greensburg,
yes,
Pennsylvania, which is about an hour east of here. And she was supposed to be a speaker, but unfortunately she had to cancel for some family reasons. So we were going to have her here and have her books available. And Dan Barker from FFRF has 2 children's books. You can get them on FFRF's website. One is called Maybe Yes, Maybe No, a guide for young skeptics. And the other one is for young atheist humanists, and I can't think of that title right now, but he does have it.
Maybe right, maybe wrong.
Maybe you're right, maybe you're wrong. Thank you.
There actually is one more. You actually just can only get it online as kind of a PDF, but there's a purple dragon in my washing machine, and it's incredibly cute. It's a critical thinking book, and it just shows you how rational that is and how to work that out yourself at a young age. So that's a good one. Thank you.
Cosmos is great for putting toddlers to sleep also.
Yeah, well, me and Arabella worked through the God Delusion during the nursing session. Thank you so much.
Thank you very much.